On the evening of August 16, 1987, Northwest Airlines Flight 255, a McDonnell Douglas MD-82 bound for Phoenix, roared down runway 3C at Detroit Metropolitan Airport. At 8:46 p.m. Eastern, with flaps and slats mistakenly retracted, the jet struggled to gain lift. In seconds, its left wing clipped a light pole, the fuselage shuddered, and the aircraft cartwheeled across Middlebelt Road, tearing itself apart in a half-mile trail of fire and wreckage. Of the 155 souls on board, 149 passengers and 6 crew, 154 perished instantly, along with 2 people on the ground. Only one life remained, that of a 4-year-old girl named Cecelia Cichan. Amid twisted metal and roaring flames, first responders discovered a single survivor by following a faint cry. Beneath an overturned airline seat, they found Cecelia, still belted in, her small hand reaching out as if pleading for help. Though scalded by third-degree burns across her arms and legs and bearing fractures to her skull, collarbone and left leg, she was remarkably alert, calling out for her mother and for my doll, the toy she clutched even as the world around her lay in ruin. Rushed to C.S. Mott Children's Hospital in Ann Arbor, Cecilia's ordeal continued under the harsh glare of surgical lamps and the steady beep of monitors. Over 4 harrowing hours, surgeons grafted skin onto battered limbs and stabilized her broken bones. Through it all, the little girl drifted in and out of consciousness, murmuring her name and calling softly, "Mommy, Mommy," as though summoning a presence she feared had vanished forever. When she finally opened her eyes, the sterile white ceiling gave way to the sight of her grandfather, Anthony Cichan, who knelt beside her bed. Her first words weren't about pain, he later recalled. She said, "My name is Cecelia Cichan." Then she asked me for her doll. The original toy had been lost in the crash. Hospital staff offered her a makeshift hospital doll, but Cecelia refused to let it go. In that moment, even amid tubes and bandages, her fierce spirit shone through. As night fell over the hospital, Cecilia's room glowed softly with get-well cards, pastel flowers, and plush animals sent by strangers moved by her survival. Nurses took turns stroking her hair and whispering soothing words. Outside her door, fire truck sirens and ambulance lights cut through the darkness. Echoes of a tragedy that had united a community in grief and in hope. In the hush between monitor beeps, Cecilia's mind drifted back to the turbulent moments before awakening. She remembered the sudden lurch, the roar of engines, and then an eerie silence, followed by a soft, loving voice calling her name. No one was there, yet that phantom call anchored her, guiding her back from the brink. It was as if, in her fragile state, love itself reached across the void to pull her through. Thus ends the first chapter of Cecilia's story. A tale of a little girl who awoke alone amid smoldering wreckage, heard a mother's call in the void, and clung to life when all around her had been lost. A miracle born out of horror and a testament to the resilience of the human heart. The cabin settled into an eerie stillness once the roaring engines fell silent. What had just minutes before been a bustling vessel brimming with laughter, conversations, and the hum of anticipation was now a graveyard of twisted metal and shattered dreams. For 4-year-old Cecelia Cichan, caught in the maelstrom of destruction, time stretched in a liminal haze between waking and dreaming, her tiny body bruised, burned and broken, but her spirit aflame with a will to survive. As emergency crews swarmed the wreckage, tearing seats from their moorings and prying panels away in search of life, Cecilia's world condensed to a pinpoint of consciousness. The sound of distant voices, the hiss of hydraulic tools, and the acrid tang of smoke thick in her lungs. Each breath was a ragged gasp. Every blink blurred her field of vision into fragments of light and shadow. Yet through the pain, one thought surfaced with crystalline clarity. Her mother. "Mommy," she whispered, her lips barely moving. The sound was swallowed by the chaos, but in her mind the voice was unwavering, warm, tender, insistent. She envisioned her mother's hand smoothing her hair, her gentle voice calling comfort as she tucked Cecelia safely into bed. In that moment, the line between memory and hallucination vanished, and Cecelia clung to the imagined presence as if it were a lifeline. A shift of movement, a shadow bending over her, and then a firm, gentle hand reached through the wreckage. A rescuer's gloved fingers undid her seatbelt and lifted her into the air, careful to brace her fragile limbs. The movement sent waves of white-hot agony coursing through her arms and legs. Tears welled in her eyes, but she did not cry out. She had learned instinctively to be still, to conserve her strength, and to trust that those voices would guide her to safety. They carried her from the shattered fuselage, passing over the still forms of strangers she would never know, but whose sacrifice gave her a chance at life. Under the flashing lights of ambulances and fire trucks, she was laid onto a stretcher, and a paramedic pressed an oxygen mask to her face. The cool rush of air was a bitter comfort, and for a fleeting moment she drifted between pain and relief, between the wreckage and the sterile brightness of the hospital corridor. Inside CS, Mott Children's Hospital, the halls pulsed with urgency. Nurses and doctors moved with a practiced choreography, each step synchronized to the beeps and alarms that lined the walls. Cecelia was wheeled into Trauma Bay 3, where surgeons in masks hovered over gleaming instruments. The room glowed under fluorescent lights, casting stark shadows that made her burned dressings and fractured bones look all the more surreal. As the team prepped her for surgery, a soft voice cut through the din. Her grandfather, Anthony, who had raced from Detroit with his heart in his throat. He slipped past the attending nurse, his eyes red-rimmed and bloodshot with worry. Dropping to his knees beside Cecelia, he brushed a strand of blonde hair from her forehead and murmured, "I'm here, sweetheart. You're safe now." His words trembled on his lips. But in the quiet space between heartbeats, Cecelia felt their power. It was as though his presence, his love, formed an invisible shield around her, bolstering her fragile body for the trials to come. Through the next hours, the surgeons labored, grafting skin to raw flesh, resetting bones, and meticulously closing wounds that had seared to the very bone. All the while, Anthony stayed by her side, reading to her from a small book of nursery rhymes, soft whispers that coaxed her awake when the anesthesia threatened to pull her under. "Mary had a little lamb," he recited, voice cracking. "Its fleece was white as snow." And in the sterile haze of the post-op ward, Cecilia's eyes would flutter open just long enough to smile, as if the familiar rhyme anchored her to the world she had momentarily lost. Through those long, relentless hours, Cecelia dreamed in fragments, the rush of wind through the cabin, the bright glare of runway lights, and always her mother's voice echoing through the darkness. At times, she saw her mother's face, soft and caring, or felt the weight of her embrace. Each memory, each whisper, drew her back from the brink, stitching together the frayed edges of her consciousness. When dawn broke over Ann Arbor, the medical team replaced the final bandage. Cecelia lay in a bed surrounded by monitors, her small chest rising and falling in even rhythm. The burns on her arms and legs were covered in pink grafts, tubes snaked from her nose and wrists, but she was alive, and that fact alone was nothing short of a miracle. Her grandfather, perched on a bedside stool, reached out and took her hand. "You did it, kiddo," he said, voice thick with emotion. Cecelia turned her head toward him, lips trembling in what might have been the ghost of a smile. "Mommy?" she asked softly. Anthony pressed his lips to her forehead. "Mommy will be here soon," he promised. And in that moment, as Cecilia's green eyes fluttered closed, the specter of the wreckage receded, leaving behind only hope. A little girl, lost in the darkness of a shattered plane, had awakened to a world that still held love, and it was love that would guide her journey forward. The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of C.S. Mott Children's Hospital, painting pale stripes across the quiet hallway. Word had spread rapidly. The lone survivor of Flight 255 was stable, conscious, and asking for her mother. By mid-morning, The emergency entrance swung open once more, this time to welcome someone whose heart pounded with anticipation and fear. Cecelia Cichan, clutching a small bouquet of daisies, rushed into the lobby, guided by a nurse's gentle hand and her husband Michael's trembling voice on the phone. His words, soft assurances tinged with sorrow, had been the only tether to reality she possessed these past harrowing hours. As Sarah stepped into Trauma Bay 3, she froze at the threshold. Before her lay the twisted remnants of flight's destruction, transformed here into the sterile battlefield of recovery. A petite figure lay in a tangle of tubes and bandages, her once vibrant dress replaced by a simple hospital gown. Sarah's breath caught. The child, her child, was alive, but pain and loss hung heavy in the air like a storm cloud. Gently, Sarah crossed the distance, pausing only when the nurse placed a gloved hand on her shoulder. "Mrs. Cichan, she's asking for you," the nurse whispered. Sarah swallowed, nodded, and stepped forward. Cecilia's eyes fluttered open at the sound of her name. They were the same green eyes that had first greeted her in the crib years ago, eyes that now mirrored confusion and relief. Sarah sank onto the stool beside her daughter's bed, smoothing back a lock of sandy blonde hair that clung to Cecilia's bandaged forehead. "Mommy!" He stood behind Sarah, wrapping an arm around her shoulders as they both looked on. Cecilia's small hand drifted upward, seeking the comfort of her mother's. Sarah intertwined her fingers with Cecilia's, marveling at the child's resilience, how, despite the horrors she'd endured, she still reached out for home. In the hours that followed, Sarah whispered stories of the life they'd shared before the flight, dances in the kitchen, bedtime stories about brave princesses, and lazy Sundays at the lake. Cecelia listened, her gaze fixed on her mother's face, as though committing every detail to memory. At times, she drifted in and out of sleep, her chest rising in shallow breaths. But each time she stirred, she repeated one small plea. "Mommy, my doll." Now she retrieved it and set it gently on Cecilia's pillow. The moment Cecilia's eyes found the doll's stitched smile, she offered a faint but unmistakable nod, her grip tightening around her mother's hand. Outside the window, ambulance sirens faded into the distance, replaced by the softer rhythms of a city awakening to a new day. Inside, a family that had been ripped apart by tragedy began its slow, fragile journey back to itself. Sarah, tears staining her cheeks, leaned close and whispered, "We're going to get through this together." Cecelia blinked, as if sealing the promise in the space between them. As afternoon dawned, surgeons emerged from their offices to deliver the prognosis. Skin grafts had taken successfully, fractures were healing, and no signs of internal bleeding remained. Each piece of good news was a brick laid in the reconstruction of hope. Sarah and Michael exchanged relieved smiles, their hands still linked around Cecilia's, unwilling to let go. But amid the relief, a tremor of fear lingered. Physical wounds, no matter how severe, could be treated. Yet the emotional scars of trauma often ran deeper. Sarah knew the road ahead would be long, months of rehabilitation, countless therapy sessions, and the daily challenge of asking a 4-year-old to find joy in a world forever altered. Still, as she watched Cecelia drift into a peaceful sleep, clutching her new doll like a lifeline, Sarah felt a surge of determination. Their family had been shattered, but together they would rebuild, one moment of courage at a time. The sun had long set when the hospital corridors emptied of visitors, leaving only the soft hum of monitors and the distant footsteps of night shift staff. In room 3B, 4-year-old Cecelia Cichan lay half awake in her bed, her small body cocooned in fresh bandages and blankets. Though her wounds were healing, her dreams were becoming battlegrounds where past and present collided in confusing, frightening images. It began with whispers, soft, urgent voices, echoing through her mind at twilight. At first, they were indistinct murmurs like the distant chatter of a crowded cabin. Then came the roar of engines and the violent shudder of metal. Cecelia bolted upright, eyes wide, convinced for a moment that the plane was ripping apart around her again. A nurse, making her rounds, gently rubbed the child's back and whispered, "You're safe here, sweetheart." But safety felt as fragile as the paper-thin walls separating her from the memory of that night. By early morning, David Cichan, her 6-year-old brother, arrived for his first visit. He stood shyly in the doorway, clutching a drawing he'd made. Cecelia and David, holding hands beneath a rainbow. His eyes, rimmed red from crying himself to sleep, brimmed with hope that his sister would be the same carefree playmate he remembered. When Cecelia turned her head and saw him, her face softened into a gentle smile, and for a moment, the terror receded. "David," she whispered, voice raspy. He ran to her side. "Cece, I missed you." "I drew us happy." They sat together, sharing whispers and gentle laughter as David described his first day back at school without her, how he'd stood up in front of the class, holding her drawing, and said, "This is my hero." Cecilia's chest swelled with pride. And for the first time, the hospital room felt more like home than a prison of pain. Yet beneath the warmth of family visits, darker emotions churned. Cecelia struggled with sudden bouts of anger. Tears at the sight of a toy airplane, rage when nurses changed her dressings, panic when her mother's hand left her side. Michael and Sarah watched, hearts tightening, as their daughter wrestled with memories they could neither erase nor fully comprehend. They realized that alongside her physical recovery, Cecelia would need help to process the trauma that haunted her young mind. Enter Dr. Elaine Hartman, a pediatric psychologist specializing in trauma. With a gentle smile and a soft British accent, she brought a suitcase full of stuffed animals, coloring books, and puppets. "Hello, Cecelia," she said, kneeling to meet the girl's gaze. "I've come to help you find your words and your courage. Sometimes," she explained, "we get lost in our thoughts and it can feel scary. But there's always a way back to the light." Using puppets, Cecelia tentatively reenacted the crash sequence, her small voice shaking as she relived the lurch, the fire, and the loneliness. Through tears, she named her fear. "I thought I was alone," she whispered. Dr. Hartman nodded, offering a warm teddy bear. "You're not alone anymore. We're all here to help you." Each milestone was a testament to her determination and a reminder to her family that healing, like love, took time. As days passed, scattered moments of peace emerged. On one afternoon, Sarah wheeled Cecelia to a quiet corner garden behind the hospital, where sunlight filtered through oak leaves and birds chirped in the breeze. Cecelia watched a butterfly land on a yellow blossom, her gaze steady for the first time in days. "It's beautiful," she breathed. Sarah smiled, brushing a strand of hair behind her daughter's ear. "Just like you, my brave girl." In the morning, she would wake with tears in her eyes, but also with a new resolve burning within her. By the end of the week, Dr. Hartman introduced a coping tool, a bravery box. Cecelia decorated a small wooden chest with stickers and glitter. Inside, she placed tiny objects that reminded her of her strength, a smooth pebble from the hospital garden, a button from her grandmother's cardigan, a scrap of colorful fabric from David's drawing. Whenever fear swelled in her chest, she could open the box, hold the tokens, and remember that she had survived, and that she always carried her courage with her. Sunlight danced through the curtains of the Cichan family's suburban home as Sarah Cichan carefully lifted Cecelia from the wheelchair and guided her down the front steps. It was the morning of September 1st, 2 weeks after the crash, and the backyard, once a mundane expanse of lawn, felt charged with possibility. Flowering hydrangeas framed the porch, and a pastel "Welcome Home Cecelia" banner fluttered in the breeze, strung between 2 oak trees by neighbors who had rallied around the family. Cecilia's heart thumped with a blend of excitement and anxiety. The smell of fresh grass and the distant hum of lawnmowers were worlds apart from sterile hospital halls. Yet the uneven ground beneath her feet, despite careful guidance, reminded her of her still healing legs. Michael watched from the wide-open front door, his eyes misting with pride as Sarah eased their daughter into position, adjusting the straps on Cecilia's leg braces before she took her first steps on solid earth. "Ready?" Sarah asked softly. Cecelia nodded, small hand slipping into her mother's. With Sarah's gentle support, she placed her left foot forward, then her right. Each movement was deliberate, her legs trembling but resolute. A chorus of cheers rose from hidden neighbors. Children clapped, grown-ups hollered encouragement, and Cecilia's lips curved into a tentative smile as she reached the bottom step. David raced beside her, waving a balloon in the shape of a heart. "You did it, Cece!" he exclaimed, and Cecelia beamed back, her confidence blooming. Inside the house, the living room had been transformed into a recovery haven. Soft blankets draped over the sofa, a bookshelf stocked with picture books and puzzles, and a small table set with paints and markers. On the wall, photographs from happier times, a family picnic by the lake, Cecilia's 4th birthday cake, served as both reassurance and a reminder of the life she was returning to. Sarah guided Cecelia to a plush armchair by the window where she could rest between therapy sessions, while Michael prepared a breakfast of cinnamon pancakes, Cecilia's favorite. Over the next days, the rhythm of hospital life gave way to a new routine at home. Physical therapy visits arrived twice daily. In the driveway one morning, Teresa, a soft-spoken physiotherapist, guided Cecelia through leg lifts on a portable mat. Inside the living room the next afternoon, occupational therapist Carlos helped her practice gripping utensils and tying shoelaces. Each session pushed her limits, but also revealed her remarkable resilience. When tears threatened, David sat by her side, playing I Spy or telling jokes, his laughter a lifeline that grounded her in the present. But homecoming brought challenges besides relearning basic movements. The local news station that had broken the story of the sole survivor now followed the family's return, and reporters lingered at the end of the driveway, microphones poised. "Cecelia, how does it feel to be home?" one reporter asked, voice crackling through her mother's phone speaker as Sarah gently steered her daughter past the interview crew. "I feel happy," Cecelia whispered, clutching her doll. "But it's still scary sometimes." The station aired a brief clip that evening, and parents across the neighborhood murmured prayers for the little girl whose courage had captured the nation's heart. In the evenings, the Cichans gathered quietly in the backyard. Michael strung twinkling lights between the oaks, and Sarah set up lawn chairs around a small fire pit, an attempt to reclaim simple family pleasures. As marshmallows toasted and smoke curled into the dusk, Cecelia sat nestled between her parents, her doll in one hand and a stick of melted chocolate confections in the other. The warmth of the fire mirrored the warmth she felt in their presence, and for a while, the weight of her trauma rested light upon her shoulders. Yet the nights could be long and uncertain. When nightmares struck, Sarah would find Cecelia standing at her bedroom door, eyes wide with fear. "It's happening again, Mommy," she'd sob. Sarah would scoop her into the crook of her arm, humming soft lullabies until the terror loosened its grip. Then she'd guide Cecelia back to her bed, tuck her in with extra blankets, and leave a nightlight glowing softly, an enduring promise that she was never alone. School loomed on the horizon. 6 years old and entering first grade, Cecelia faced her next milestone with both anticipation and trepidation. Sarah arranged for the school counselor to visit their home, discussing strategies to support Cecilia's physical accommodations and emotional needs. They talked about letting her take breaks in the nurse's office if she felt overwhelmed, and training classmates in simple gestures, like using sign language for calm or hug, to help her communicate when words failed. As September deepened into autumn, Cecelia strode into her new classroom, wearing knee pads beneath her jeans and a wide-brimmed hat to shade her healing scars. David waved proudly as she took her seat at a desk decorated with stickers of stars and rainbows. A hush fell, then a ripple of applause as her teacher introduced her as our very own hero. Cecilia's cheeks flushed, but a steady light flickered in her green eyes. She placed her doll on the desk beside her name tag and sat tall, ready to begin this next chapter. And so, in the comfort of home and the embrace of community, Cecilia's journey continued, not defined solely by the ashes of Flight 255, but by every step she took beyond the wreckage. Each morning brought new challenges and new reasons to hope. In the laughter of her brother, the unwavering support of her parents, and the kindness of neighbors and strangers alike, she found a tapestry of love stronger than any crash, guiding her toward healing and toward a future where bravery was simply part of her everyday life. The golden light of a late October afternoon bathed the Cichan backyard in a warm glow as Cecelia and David chased each other around the oak tree that bore their homemade "Welcome Home" banner. The crisp air carried the scent of fallen leaves and pumpkin spice from a neighbor's porch. Laughter echoed across the yard like a bell calling them back to life. 2 months had passed since her homecoming, and though Cecilia's body was stronger, her heart still carried echoes of that dark night. Today's mission was simple: to ring the wind chimes Sarah had hung in the oak's branches. Each chime, crafted from painted seashells and bits of colored glass, represented a milestone in Cecilia's recovery, a successful therapy session, a nightmare-free night, a day without tears. As her small hand reached up to tap one of the lowest chimes, the tinkling melody felt like sunlight on her skin. David cheered, clapping his hands, and Sarah watched from the porch, her heart swelling with pride. But when the wind settled and only silence remained, Cecelia winced as the memory of twisting metal and searing heat rippled through her mind. She closed her eyes against it, the yard's cheerful colors dimming for a moment. Sarah noticed the tremor in her daughter's shoulders and set aside her knitting to go to her side. "Hey, sweetie," she said softly, placing a hand on Cecilia's back. "You okay?" Before Sarah could reply, David bounded forward, his face alight with excitement. "Look what I made in art class." He held out a paper collage covered in cut-out hearts. "It's our family. See? That's you, Mommy, that's me, and that's Cece with her bravery box." Cecelia accepted the collage, her small fingers tracing the hearts. In that simple act, her brother's joy, her mother's concern, and her own creative heart, she felt anchored once more. Later that evening, as dusk settled and the street lamps flickered on, the family gathered around the kitchen table. A warm stew simmered on the stove, and the scent of cinnamon rolls filled the air. Michael disconnected his work laptop, slid off his shoes, and poured hot cider for everyone. It was their Sunday ritual, dinner together, followed by a story read aloud. Tonight's choice was The Wizard of Oz, a tale Sarah hoped would remind Cecelia that even the longest journeys could lead back home. But as the pages turned and Dorothy searched for her place in a world both strange and wondrous, Cecilia's gaze drifted to the window, where the night sky held a million glimmering stars. She thought of the blackened fuselage left behind in Detroit, of sirens and flames, and of the lonesome call she'd heard when she first awoke. A fresh wave of guilt washed over her. Survivor's guilt, the doctors had called it. How could she laugh at dinner when so many others had perished? Sensing her retreat, Dr. Elaine Hartman's words echoed in Sarah's mind. Allow the guilt, then help her name it. Carefully, Sarah closed the book and met Cecilia's eyes. "You know, honey," she began, voice steady, "it's okay to feel sad or guilty. What happened wasn't your fault." Cecilia's bottom lip trembled. "But people died," she sobbed. "I shouldn't have lived." "Sweetheart, you're the only one who survived for a reason. You have a chance to live your life, to honor those we lost by being the bravest, kindest person you can be." He pointed to the collage David had made. "When you wear your bravery box, you carry their memory and your courage with you. We'll write the names of people we miss on slips of paper, light the lantern, and let it float into the sky." Outside, Halloween decorations flickered in front yards. A floating lantern would be a perfect tribute. They spent the next hour crafting, Cecelia wrote her classmates' and neighbors' names, drawing small hearts beside each. David inscribed the names of his friends who'd helped, and Michael and Sarah added the names of the 6 crew members and 148 passengers lost on Flight 255. When they finally lit the lantern in the driveway, its golden glow illuminated their faces as it drifted upward, an offering of remembrance and a promise of hope. In the days that followed, Cecelia found that naming her fears and her guilt gave them shape and power to release them. At school, she talked openly with her counselor about the weight she'd carried. She discovered that sharing her story helped others. Classmates who'd faced small tragedies, like a lost pet or a parent's divorce, found courage in her honesty. Teachers reported that Cecelia had become a quiet leader, rallying classmates to kindness and inclusion. Back at home, her therapy sessions took on a new edge. Art therapy led her to paint a vibrant phoenix rising from ash. Occupational therapy focused on fine motor skills through crafting memory boxes for each family member. She even helped Dr. Hartman create a Courage Garden poster, an illustrated guide for children to name, acknowledge, and release their fears. By the end of October, Cecilia's nightmares had lessened, replaced by dreams of soaring through star-speckled skies, free and unafraid. Each morning, she awoke with a grin, eager to add another shell to her wind chimes or paint another heart on the lantern. The wreckage of Flight 255 remained a shadow in her past, but it no longer defined her present. As Halloween night descended, Cecelia donned her princess costume, complete with knee pads hidden beneath her tulle skirt, and joined David in a triumphant stroll through their neighborhood. Neighbors cheered, handing out candy and hugs. Under the watchful glow of jack-o'-lanterns, Cecilia's laughter rang clear, a declaration that she had reclaimed her life, piece by piece, memory by memory. By mid-November, autumn's vibrant hues had faded to a muted tapestry of bare branches and frost-kissed lawns. The Cichan household hummed with the low buzz of winter preparations. Holiday lights were strung across the porch, and the scent of cinnamon and pine drifted through the rooms. Yet beneath the festive exterior lay a quieter transformation. Cecilia's journey from fragile survivor to confident child was reaching a new milestone. It began one crisp Saturday morning. Michael and Sarah had arranged for a special surprise, a visit to a local adaptive sports center where children with physical challenges could try activities like swimming, horseback riding, and wheelchair basketball. Cecelia awoke to find her leg braces replaced by soft athletic supports and her favorite purple coat zipped tight. David bounded into her room, brandishing a pair of bright goggles. "Ready to swim, hero?" He grinned. At the sports center, sunlight streamed through high windows onto glossy tile floors. Cecelia watched wide-eyed as counselors guided children of all ages into the pool. The water rippled in shades of blue, promising buoyancy and freedom. When her turn came, Cecelia hesitated at the edge, toes curling on the cool tile. Memories of hospital baths and slippery floors flickered in her mind. But then she felt the gentle hand of a volunteer, Ms. Rivera, who had once been a Paralympic swimmer herself. "Just lean back and float," Ms. Rivera instructed, her voice calm and encouraging. "I'll be right here." Laughter bubbled up in her chest, pure, unguarded joy. David dove in beside her, and together they practiced blowing bubbles and swimming laps, their giggles echoing off the tiled walls. After swimming, Cecelia tried horseback riding. In a cozy barn just down the road, she was fitted with a safety helmet and introduced to a gentle gelding named Jasper. At first, the idea of sitting atop an animal larger than herself made her nervous. But as she climbed into the padded saddle with the help of an adaptive lift, she felt a thrill of excitement. With reins in her small hands and a supportive instructor at her side, she guided Jasper in slow circles around the arena. The rhythmic sway of his strides soothed her, and she found herself whispering, "Good boy, Jasper," as he nickered in response. As the day wore on, Cecilia's confidence blossomed. She learned to dribble a basketball in a specially adapted chair, to paint with watercolors while balancing on a skateboard, and even attempted a simple archery lesson, her arrow landing with a satisfying thud into the target's bullseye. Each new activity chipped away at the shadows of self-doubt that lingered near the edges of her mind. For the first time since the crash, she felt not like a patient in recovery, but like a child discovering the wide world of possibilities. That evening, wrapped in a soft blanket on the living room floor, Cecelia recounted her adventures to her grandparents who had flown in for Thanksgiving. She described the sensation of floating in the pool as like flying underwater, and her laughter was contagious as she mimed Jasper's gentle nuzzles. Michael and Sarah exchanged glances of astonishment and pride at the transformation in their daughter. No longer was she the frightened child in a hospital gown. She was a brave girl, eager to take on new challenges. The holiday weekend unfolded in a flurry of activity, decorating the Christmas tree with amber lights and ornaments shaped like stars, baking gingerbread cookies whose sweet aroma filled the house, and wrapping gifts to place beneath twinkling branches. On Thanksgiving Day, the extended family gathered around a grand table laden with roasted turkey, mashed potatoes, and fields of warm cranberries. When it came time to share what they were thankful for, Cecelia stood on her chair, clutching her bravery box in one hand and Jasper's riding badge in the other. "I'm thankful," she began, her voice steady and clear, "for my family who never gave up on me, for my brother who made me laugh every day, and for all the friends who helped me learn to swim and ride. I'm thankful I'm still here." Cecilia's gratitude wasn't just for her own survival, but for the community that had rallied around her, the kindness that had sustained her, and the inner strength she had barely known she possessed. As dusk fell and the holiday lights blinked on outside, Cecelia settled onto the couch beside her parents. She opened her bravery box, now overflowing with treasures: the hospital pebble, shells from the chimes, the riding badge Jasper had awarded her, and more. Each item was a testament to a victory won, a step taken toward reclaiming her life. Later, as she lay in bed that night, Cecelia closed her eyes with a sense of peace she hadn't known in months. Her dreams were gentle now, fields of wildflowers under azure skies, the soft rhythm of hooves on earth, and always the steady pulse of her own courageous heart, guiding her forward. Winter's chill had settled over the Cichan home, frosting windows and blanketing the yard in a soft layer of snow. Inside, the furnace hummed and the scent of pine boughs mingled with cinnamon in the air. Cecelia sat at the kitchen table, her sketchbook open before her, sketching the MD-82's silhouette as it once soared across the sky, an image that both haunted and fascinated her. She had confided in Dr. Hartman that despite all she'd endured, a part of her longed to fly again, to reclaim the freedom of the clouds rather than be defined by the catastrophe that nearly stole her life. Sarah and Michael watched their daughter with a mixture of awe and trepidation. They cherished her newfound confidence in so many areas: adaptive sports, school leadership, creative therapy. But the idea of returning to an airplane stirred a deep anxiety in them. Yet they recognized that healing meant facing fears head-on, not avoiding them forever. On a crisp Saturday morning, they revealed a special plan: a visit to the Willow Run Aviation Museum, just 30 miles from home. Michael had arranged for a private tour with Captain Elena Morales, a retired airline pilot who volunteered her time mentoring young survivors of trauma. Sarah took Cecilia's hand as they stepped into the drafty hangar, where sunlight filtered through high windows to illuminate rows of vintage aircraft. The air smelled of oil, metal, and ambition, a fitting fragrance for a day of courage. Captain Morales greeted them warmly, her silver hair tucked beneath a baseball cap embroidered with wings. "Welcome, Cecelia," she said, her voice calm and authoritative. "Today we're going to explore the history of flight together, and I want to show you that airplanes are built for safety, for wonder, and yes, for adventure." She led them to a meticulously restored Beechcraft Baron, its fuselage gleaming like polished chrome. Inside the cockpit, Cecelia's heart pounded as she ran her fingers over the throttle and yoke. Dials and gauges lined the panel. Each tiny needle and digital display told a story of precision engineering. Captain Morales explained how redundant systems, rigorous maintenance, and multiple trained crew members all worked together to keep passengers safe. She invited Cecelia to sit in the pilot's seat, buckle in, and ask questions. When Cecelia's trembling voice finally broke the hush, she asked the question she most feared. What if something goes wrong again? Captain Morales smiled gently. That's exactly why we train so hard. We practice every scenario, engine failures, turbulence, even fires, until we know how to respond calmly and correctly. The sky can feel unpredictable, but we're prepared for every possibility. Michael squeezed Sarah's hand, pride swelling in his chest. For the first time, the crash felt less like an omen and more like a lesson in resilience. Next, Captain Morales escorted them outside where a small Cessna 172 waited on the snowy ramp. Though too large to board, Cecelia donned a bright orange safety vest and walked around the plane, identifying wing struts, landing gear, and the propeller that once roared to life under a pilot's command. She traced her finger along the riveted seams, marveling at how every bolt and panel was designed to handle forces far greater than her own small frame. As the tour concluded, Captain Morales presented Cecelia with a commemorative flight logbook. "One day," she said, "I hope you'll fill this with your own adventures, skydiving, glider flights, maybe even piloting a plane like this." She winked, and Cecelia's eyes sparkled with the possibility. That night, back at home, Cecelia tucked the logbook beside her bravery box. She sat on her bed, running a finger over the embossed cover. First flights, new horizons. In her mind's eye, she saw herself donning a pilot's headset, peering through a canopy at cotton ball clouds drifting beneath her. It was a vision of empowerment, not terror. Over the next weeks, Cecelia's drawings shifted from wreckage and nightmares to clouds, birds, and smiling planes. She began writing in her logbook. "Today I learned how wings work. I felt the metal and knew it was strong." Each entry was a small victory, a reclaiming of the sky that had once betrayed her. When spring arrived, the Cichans planned a celebratory outing, a short sightseeing flight over Lake Huron, accompanied by Captain Morales. As the Cessna lifted off the tarmac, Cecelia pressed her face to the window, the world unfolding below in shades of blue and green. Her heart fluttered, not with panic, but with exhilaration. The wind whispered through the open window, and she closed her eyes, letting the hum of the engine carry her forward. Up in the air, she glanced at Captain Morales, who gave her a thumbs up. Cecelia returned the gesture, a confident grin spreading across her face. In that moment, the plane was more than metal and stress. It was a vessel of hope, freedom, and second chances. As they touched down smoothly back at the airfield, Cecelia's feet met solid ground, yet her spirit remained aloft. She had faced her deepest fear and soared above it. And though the memory of Flight 255 would always be part of her story, it no longer held her captive. Winter melted into spring, and the world around the Cichans bloomed in a riot of color. Dogwood trees unfurled delicate white blossoms, tulips nodded in cheerful rows, and the air carried the promise of renewal. Inside the house, Cecelia's logbook lay open on her bedside table, its pages filled with sketches of clouds and little notations in her careful hand. Yet one page remained blank, reserved for a dream she had not yet dared to write. One Saturday morning, as golden sunlight flooded her room, Cecelia awoke with a flutter of excitement. Today was the day of the big fundraiser, a charity gala at the Willow Run Aviation Museum in support of pediatric trauma survivors. Her parents had spent months organizing the event, and Cecelia, now a young ambassador for resilience, had been invited to speak. Dressed in a navy blue dress adorned with tiny silver airplanes, she bounded downstairs, her logbook tucked safely in her backpack. In the museum's grand hangar, long tables draped in white linen held silent auctions, model airplanes in glass cases, flight simulator sessions, and commemorative plaques. Twinkling lights traced the silhouettes of vintage aircraft suspended overhead. Survivors, families, donors, and aviation enthusiasts mingled beneath the polished fuselages, united by a common purpose. At the front, a small stage bore a lectern engraved with the event's motto, "From ashes we rise." Hartman, but speaking before a crowd of 200 was a different challenge altogether. Michael knelt beside her and whispered, "Remember, breathe, smile, and speak from the heart." Sarah brushed back a strand of hair and added, "You've already inspired so many. Just be yourself." She approached the microphone, cleared her throat, and looked out at the sea of faces, some familiar, others strangers, united by compassion. "Hello," she began, her voice soft. "My name is Cecelia Cichan. On August 16, 1987, I was the only person to survive the crash of Flight 255. I was 4 years old. At first, I thought I was alone. I woke up in the wreckage and heard my mum calling me, but she wasn't there. I was scared, hurt, and lost. A hush fell over the crowd. But thanks to the kindness of strangers, first responders who pulled me from the flames, doctors and nurses who saved my life, and my family who never stopped believing, I'm here today. I learned that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's choosing to move forward despite it. And I found that the sky, once a place of terror, could become a canvas for my dreams. I'm going to write on it my biggest dream, to one day become a pilot and help other children who are afraid of flying. A ripple of applause swept the audience. Cecelia allowed herself a small, triumphant smile. She stepped away from the microphone and returned to her parents' arms, where David greeted her with a high five. Later, as the gala continued, people approached her to share their own stories of trauma overcome, of fear faced, of hope restored. Cecelia realized that her words had reached far beyond her family, touching hearts she'd never imagined. That night, back at home, Sarah tucked Cecelia into bed. "You were amazing," she whispered. Cecelia nodded, clutching the logbook. "I wrote my dream," she announced, and opened to the blank page. In careful letters she inscribed, "One day I will fly children above the clouds so they can see how big the world really is." Beneath, she drew a small airplane soaring over mountains and rivers. Michael kissed her forehead. "That dream is as vast as the sky itself," he said. Cecelia yawned, her eyelids heavy. "And I'll fill every page in this book," she murmured, drifting to sleep with a smile. In the weeks that followed, the gala raised enough funds to establish the Cecilia's Wings Scholarship, providing therapeutic flights and aviation experiences for young survivors of trauma. Dr. D. Hartman organized workshops on coping and resilience, while the museum offered free entry days for families in need. Cecilia's story continued to ripple outward, inspiring countless others to face their own fears and chase their own dreams. As summer approached, the day came for Cecilia's first flight lesson in a real training cockpit, her ultimate step toward the dream she had boldly written in her logbook. Walking into the flight school hangar, she felt the familiar flutter in her chest. But this time, it was not fear, it was excitement, a promise of horizons yet to be charted. Summer sunlight streamed through the hangar's open doors as Cecelia stood before the gleaming nose of a Piper Cherokee, her small frame enveloped in an oversized flight jacket. Today was more than just her first official lesson in a proper training aircraft. It was the inaugural day of Cecilia's Wings, the scholarship program she had inspired at the gala. Alongside her, 2 other children, both survivors of traumatic events, stood wide-eyed, clutching their own flight logbooks and wearing identical smiles of anticipation. Captain Elena Morales, now the program's honorary director, approached the group with a gentle yet confident stride. She knelt to meet each child's gaze. "Welcome, future aviators," she said, her voice warm. "Today you'll discover that the sky can be a place of healing, not fear. You'll learn that each takeoff is a step toward freedom, and every landing is a triumph of courage. When the children hesitated, uncertain where to place their hands, Cecelia's soft encouragement bridged the gap between fear and understanding. In the passenger cabin, Sarah and Michael watched from the wings, their hearts full. They exchanged a glance that needed no words. Their daughter, once so fragile, now stood as a beacon of hope for others. David, perched on a folding chair nearby, held a recorder to capture every word, promising to edit it into a first flight video that would inspire future beneficiaries of the scholarship. Captain Morales ran through the safety briefing. Seatbelts, emergency exits, communication protocols. Then she gestured to the runway. "Whenever you're ready, Cecelia." She slid on a headset, adjusted the yoke strap to her height, and inhaled the familiar scent of leather and instruments. "Throttle check?" she asked, voice confident. "Throttle check," Morales affirmed. Cecelia advanced the lever smoothly, and the propeller spun to life, its rhythmic blur a comforting hum in her ears. As they taxied, the other children watched, fingers intertwined, their faces alight with possibility. When Cecelia radioed for takeoff clearance and the Cherokee accelerated down the runway, lifting gracefully into the clear blue sky, cheers erupted from the ground. In that instant, the children below saw not just a plane climbing heavenward, but the embodiment of their own potential. If she could soar, so could they. Up above, the world unfurled in patchwork fields, winding rivers, and tiny towns. Cecelia pointed out landmarks she had once sketched from her bedroom window. Her school, the hospital on the outskirts of Ann Arbor, the highway where Flight 255 had torn across history. But in this moment, these places felt smaller, less fearsome. The sky was vast, filled with endless opportunity rather than looming danger. Captain Morales guided the children through simple maneuvers, gentle turns, altitude changes, and simulated emergency procedures. Cecelia assisted, reading gauges aloud and monitoring the horizon for drift. Each successful action, banking smoothly, maintaining steady altitude, was met with squeals of excitement from her co-ambassador flyers. They felt the exhilaration of mastering something once unimaginable. After a triumphant hour in the air, the Cherokee descended for a smooth landing. The children climbed out, faces flushed with triumph, and rushed to embrace Cecelia. "You're amazing," one whispered. "Thank you for showing me it's okay to try," said the other. Cecelia's smile was radiant as she opened her logbook and helped them inscribe their first entries. Cameras clicked, and volunteers offered lemonade and cookies shaped like tiny airplanes, a sweet reward for bravery in the face of the unknown. That evening, as the hangar emptied and the sun dipped below the horizon, Cecelia lingered by the Cherokee, tracing its riveted seams with her fingertips. She closed her eyes and breathed in the still, warm air, letting the memory of flight sink into her bones. In that quiet moment, she realized that her journey had evolved. No longer was she merely a survivor reclaiming her own life. She was now a mentor, a friend, and a guardian of hope for others walking the path she once trod alone. When she finally returned home, David greeted her with his recorder. "Tell me your favorite part," he urged. Cecelia laughed and recounted the thrill of takeoff, the sight of her fellow children's grins, and the soaring freedom that had washed away every trace of fear. She paused, looking at her father and mother. "Thank you," she said softly, "for helping me spread my wings, and for believing I could help others spread theirs. You've given us the greatest gift, Cece, a reminder that love and compassion can turn even the darkest sky into a canvas of possibilities." And as she drifted to sleep, the hum of the Cherokee's engine echoed in her dreams, a lullaby of courage carried on the wings of compassion, and a promise that together they would all continue to soar. The morning light of mid-July filtered through Cecelia's bedroom window, painting soft patterns on the floral bedspread where her stuffed animals sat vigil. Though summer break was in full swing, Cecelia rose early, her thoughts already alive with purpose. Today marked the one-year anniversary of her reunion with family, her first day home after the crash of Flight 255, and she intended to honor it in her own special way. Downstairs, Sarah and Michael prepared breakfast, French toast dusted with powdered sugar and fresh berries, while David sprinted from room to room, camera in hand, capturing candid moments of family life. The kitchen buzzed with excitement. A small banner reading "1 year of wings" had been strung above the doorway, and on the table lay a scrapbook filled with photos. Hospital moments, backyard therapy sessions, the adaptive sports day, and the gala where Cecelia had first spoken her dream aloud. When Cecelia entered, her parents looked up in unison. "Happy anniversary, honey," Sarah said, pulling her into a hug. "You've come so far." Cecilia's green eyes glistened as she took her place at the head of the table, wearing her Cecilia's Wings cap and a simple white tee with an embroidered phoenix rising. "I have something for you," she announced, and lifted the scrapbook. Michael and Sarah leaned forward, flipping through the pages and pausing at each memory. David's smiling face beside her wheelchair, the day she first rode Jasper, the red carpet moment at the gala. "It's beautiful," Michael whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for capturing it." Cecelia traced names with care and then added a small symbol, a pair of wings crossed over a heart. "For them," she murmured. After breakfast, the family drove to the Edgewater Memorial Park, a peaceful riverside overlook where a memorial plaque had been installed earlier, engraved with the names of all who perished on Flight 255. Volunteers had laid wreaths of white lilies and blue hydrangeas at its base. Cecelia approached the plaque, her parents close behind, and placed a single seashell, one she had collected the day she first walked at home, beside the flowers. She stood in silence, the gentle rush of the river a soothing counterpoint to the weight of memory. With her hand resting lightly on the cool metal, Cecelia closed her eyes and spoke softly. "Thank you for believing in me. I promise to live a life worthy of the gift you gave." Sarah pressed her cheek to Cecilia's hair and whispered, "You honor them every day." Back in the car, they shared stories. David joked about how seriously his sister took her logbook entries. Michael recounted the thrill of her first takeoff. Sarah recalled how Cecilia's laughter first returned after therapy. Their voices wove together, a tapestry of hope threaded through loss. Later that afternoon, Cecelia convened a small gathering in their backyard. Friends from school, the therapists who had guided her, and fellow scholarship recipients she had met at the museum. Under the dappled shade of the oak trees, they assembled small paper lanterns, each inscribed with personal messages of remembrance or hope. "For courage," one child wrote. "For dreams," another added. Cecelia helped each child light a candle and set their lantern afloat on a shallow reflecting pool, a rainbow of flickering lights drifting, then disappearing into the rippling surface. As dusk fell, the lanterns formed a constellation in miniature, their glow mirrored in eager eyes. Cecelia stood at the edge of the pool, her own lantern alight with the names of those she had loved and lost. "May your light guide us," she whispered, watching it drift away. Around her, the community shared tears and smiles, bound together by the fragile beauty of healing. That evening, as the last lantern sank beneath the water, Sarah tucked Cecelia into bed. "You've created something wonderful today," she said. "You've honored the past and given hope for the future." Cecelia nodded, eyelids heavy. "I think courage is like these lanterns," she murmured. "We light them ourselves, and even though they float away, their glow stays with us." She dreamt of lantern-filled skies, of airplanes soaring alongside constellations, and of a life that, though born from tragedy, was illuminated by love, memory, and unbreakable strength. A soft pink dawn crept across the horizon as 17-year-old Cecelia stood on the tarmac of the Ann Arbor Flight Academy, her crisp uniform jacket freshly pressed, her flight logbook tucked securely under one arm. The Piper Cherokee she once flew as a child now waited beside her in the morning mist, its familiar lines both comforting and charged with new significance. Today was the day of her first solo cross-country flight, an achievement earned through countless hours of dual instruction, simulator practice, and personal study. It was the culmination of a journey that began in tragedy, but had been defined by resilience and purpose. Sarah and Michael stood at the windsock's base, pride shining in their eyes. David, now 12, captured the moment on video, his camera craning upward as Cecelia approached the plane. She paused, closing her eyes for a breath, recalling the frightened 4-year-old who first touched a yoke in a dusty hangar. She felt the weight of every scar, every graft, and every setback she'd overcome, yet none of it felt like a burden. Rather, it fueled her confidence. Climbing into the cockpit, Cecelia ran a quick checklist: fuel quantity, control surface freedom, radio clear. Her fingers moved with practiced precision. Captain Elena Morales, her mentor since childhood, hovered on the wing, offering a final thumbs up. Through the intercom, Cecelia responded, "Ready for departure, tower." The engine's roar vibrated through the airframe as she taxied to runway 21 and lifted off into the gold-tinged sky. The world unfurled beneath her in fresh perspective, the winding Huron River snaking through emerald fields, the sleepy neighborhoods of Ann Arbor shrinking beneath her wings. Every maneuver, climbing to pattern altitude, coordinating clearances, balancing trim alongside wind gusts, felt intuitive, a dance of metal and air she had long mastered. And yet, for all her skill, her heart fluttered with anticipation. This was her first true solo venture beyond sight of a mentor, a test of her independence and the confidence instilled in her since that fateful crash. Midway through the flight, Cecelia steadied on 3,500 feet above Lake Erie, the water's sapphire surface shimmering far below. She transmitted her position, then reached over to a small frame on her dash, a childhood photograph of her 4-year-old self, helmet askew, eyes sparkling at her very first flight. She smiled, mentally tracing the arc from that frightened child to the pilot she'd become. "Thank you," she whispered to the sky, "for giving me wings." The Cherokee slowed to a taxi as the tower cleared her to the ramp. She cut the engine and sat, absorbing the silence that followed. On the ground, cheers erupted from her family and friends gathered beneath the hangar's lights. Tears glinted on Sarah's cheeks. Michael's arms lifted David in celebration. Cecelia climbed out, her legs unbraced, her spirit soaring. That afternoon, at the dedication ceremony for the newly expanded Cecelia's Wings Learning Center, an adaptive flight lab named in her honor, she addressed the crowd. Hundreds of children, families, and aviation professionals filled the hangar, where gleaming flight simulators and interactive cockpit mock-ups stood ready. Cecelia spoke of dreams born from ashes, of the importance of community, and of her unwavering belief that every child deserves a chance to fly, both literally and figuratively. As she unveiled a bronze plaque bearing her childhood photograph and the inscription "From Survivor to Skipper," the audience rose in a standing ovation. In the weeks that followed, Cecelia balanced her senior year of high school with flight training towards her private pilot certificate. She volunteered as a mentor in the scholarship program, coaching younger recipients through pre-flight inspections and confidence-building exercises. On weekends, she could be found tutoring math at the local community center, her gentle patience helping others solve complex problems with newfound clarity. Every act, in the air or on the ground, echoed the principle she had learned so young, that courage grows through compassion and shared experience. As summer waned, Cecelia faced the FAA written exam, a rigorous battery of aerodynamics, regulations, and meteorology. Surrounded by her family in the backyard under a canopy of late summer stars, she opened her logbook to a new entry. July 10th, 2025, passed FAA written exam on first attempt. Next, check ride. She lifted her pen, signing off with her signature flourish, Cecelia Cichan, future captain. That night, before drifting to sleep, Cecelia gazed at the ceiling where glow-in-the-dark stars formed constellations she had once mapped on paper. She whispered a promise into the darkness, to fly every child who doubted themselves into a world of possibility, to carry their fears aloft until all that remained was wonder. In her heart, the echo of a mother's call in the wreckage had transformed into a compass pointing toward purpose. Thus concludes the final chapter of Cecelia's story. From a lone survivor awakening in a field of debris to a young aviator guiding others beyond their fear, her life became a testament to the transformative power of hope, belonging, and the unbreakable human spirit.